This is the Postman Workshop API First Lifecycle. Just quick disclaimer, you're able to follow along. I'm going to go through the workshop myself, so we'll do it together. I'll switch back and forth between like instructions and what we do in Postman. I was expecting tables in the room for the workshop. We don't have tables, so hopefully your laptop doesn't like heat up too much. We're not using any like powerful tool. If you use Postman in your browser, it shouldn't heat up too much. But again, yeah, if your legs get tired or anything at any point, just close your laptop, follow along with me. It's a workshop, so if you have any questions at any point, just raise your hand. We have Pooja there. Also, if you have questions, she might be coming around. She can unblock you on some stuff. With that said, the API First Workshop again. My name's Arlemi. I lead developer advocacy at Postman. And part of our job is go places, talk about Postman to people, and then we learn from these people. So that's why, like, whenever you're going to ask me a question, I'll get some feedback, bring it back to product, and we improve the product based on your feedback. So do bring it. If there's a flow that you feel is not like, proper or that you would have expected something else, just let me know. We'll have time at the end for Q&A. And I'm also going to ask you some questions at the end. I know some of you are on the booth, but I'll ask you some questions, and whoever is the first one to answer correctly will get one of these hardcover, copy edition, limited edition, whatnot, of the API First, which is just a graphic novel, but it's pretty cool. And maybe I'll just like give a few away. Okay, so with that said, what we're going to do today, I'll just get a couple slides just to talk about what is API First, just to have everyone on the same page. I'll walk through the 5 things we're going to do during the workshop, and then we'll jump into it, and it's just going to be in Postman, get an open API definition, start generating some stuff left and right, and see how that could be helpful for your workflow. Does that sound good? Yeah, nods, very nice. Okay, cool. So, what's API First? Who's actually here? Who would say they're doing API First at their company? We have 2.5. That's probably what we see in the industry. We want more people to be API First because we think there's like a lot of benefits to it. Hopefully I can convince you with this, but we just know that most of the times, at least developers don't really care about API First. It's not their first worry. They just want something that works. But maybe I can demo something. So a definition of it is API First is defining and designing APIs with schemas before beginning development. So the idea is you have that file that we call an API definition that defines your routes, your endpoints, your parameters, etc. And then you know how all of your different devices or different like microservices will interact. And because you have that base, you can generate mock servers, you can generate different things, but everyone speaks the same language. So that's your source of truth. And you all know that, oh, I'm using that API from that team. We have the same definition. We're working on the same domain. So that's helpful. How this fits in the workflow. So we have these things called Lifecycle. There's different type of lifecycle. We have the producer lifecycle, so whoever creates an API. We have the consumer lifecycle, whoever uses API, but have like things in common. But for the API First workflow, so we start by defining. So it's just, let's all get on the same table, talk about how the services are going to interact. Then we create the document, so we design it. And then that's when it gets interesting. So we can deploy straight from that API definition. We can generate tests, we can monitor it. And lastly, we can publish it for other people to use. So if we think about a company like Stripe or Vonage, that's around, or even like Google, right? You want to use their APIs, they publish them, and then you have access to them. So that's the last part of it. And it's a cycle. It doesn't stop there. It's not, oh, my API is published, I'm never going to touch it again, right? You get some feedback. You improve the API over and over. So why? Why OpenAPI? I mentioned it. It's a common machine-readable definition. Some of us around can just read YAML and understand it from scratch. Not everyone is able to. I'm not able to do that. So we actually generate documentation for you, but it's common and machine can read it, so that's useful. It powers consumer engagement and enterprise infrastructure. Again, you can generate things with it, but also it's discussion starting point. You have that common ground. And you can do contract testing. Who here is familiar with contract testing? Nobody. Okay, one. Quick definition of contract testing. I'm a producer. I have an API. I give you my API. You're going to use my API. So I give you my API, and then you come back to me and you tell me, this is exactly what I'm going to do with your API. let's make it not break. So you give me that contract. You tell me, run this test. So now, me, when I'm going to deploy a new version of my API, I'm going to run your tests. And I'm making sure that whatever I'm deploying doesn't break your production. Because you're integrating with my API, it makes no one's business to break someone's API. So that's contract testing, and this actually enables that a lot easier, because from the start I can give you the API definition, and we can write contracts based on that. So we'll get started now. I've got the instructions on GitHub, but you can access them from that link, which is go.pstmn.io/API-first-instructions. Just actually, can you show me show of hands who's actually going to try to follow along? So we have you, 1, 2. Okay, so we have quite a few in the back. So I'll always leave some time for you to catch up anyway. Okay, so let me. Oop. So it is go postman.io. Also, this is not my machine, so hopefully I'm not going to break anything. Are you logged into Postman already, Pooja? Yes. Okay. So just going to open Postman on the side. Okay, so once again, URL is go.pstmn.io/API-first-instructions. Anyone doesn't have the URL yet? Nope. You good? You can, so if you have Postman installed on your PC, you can do that as well. I'm using the browser just because, I don't know, I've just kept on using that for the last year or so. But if you have Postman installed, you may as well go with that. Okay, so quick walkthrough, what we're going to do. I've kept on banging about OpenAPI API definition, so that's going to be our start. I'm going to make you import an API definition. From there, we're just going to inspect it, see what is it, what does it define. We start generating documentation. Then we'll publish a first version. We'll add another endpoint, just so you can see how it works to edit an OpenAPI. And then we'll generate a mock server. Who's familiar with mock servers? Okay, we have a few. I'm asking that question, but I'm always going to define it anyway for everyone else. Mock servers is a way of doing parallel development. So you have an API definition. You generate a fake server that sends fake responses, but it's based on your API. So you can provide that to your front-end team, and your front-end team starts integrating with that fake server. In the meantime, your back-end team, they actually create the back-end. They create the connections with the databases. They create connections with third-party APIs. And whenever both teams are done, you can replace the mock server endpoint by the production endpoint. And because there's this contract testing thanks to the API definition, it should just connect and work out of the box. That's the ideal world. Obviously, sometimes there's some discrepancies, but most of the time it works. Cool. So that's the instructions. Now let's go into Postman, either on the web, so you can go to postman.com and log in, or you can open the app. And we'll start with, just in order to not pollute anyone's workspace, you can click on Workspace on the top left, and you can click Create Workspace. So I'll create one that I'm going to call Apidays Paris. Different type of workspaces doesn't really matter. I'll keep it personal because I don't want to. I know we have more people in this team, so I don't want to add too many. And now you have a brand new workspace. There's nothing in it. Brand new empty workspace that you're not really sure how to do. But a workspace is the place where you store your Postman data, maybe collections, APIs, monitors, mocks, etc. That's where they live. So you have team workspaces if you collaborate. You have personal workspace if it's just you and it's private to you. So from there, we'll go here at the. Actually, do you want me to zoom in once or is it fine? That's fine? Yep, cool. So I'll go here at the top next to the name of the workspace, and I'll click import. We'll go into link, and then you should have the GitHub instructions open on the side anyway. So go ahead and grab the link that is there. Oop. going to copy over this, paste it in the import. And you can see it recognizes that it's an API. It's going to import, it recognizes it's OpenAPI 3.0. And I can go ahead, click import, let it do its work. So it's importing definition. That's the one we're working off. And you can see it automatically generates a collection as well. So now, I'll go to the APIs tab on the left. And you can see there's this customer's API that's created. If I unfurl this, I can see there's a definition called index.json. It's right there. And there's a collection. But we got that right after. So for those of you following along, if you're lagging behind, just raise your hand and I'll slow down. Otherwise, I'll have to assume that you're at pace. And then Pooja is just going to keep an eye and she can like roam around and just make sure that you're there. Okay, so let's have a look at this. For those of you who are not familiar with OpenAPI, so this one is a JSON file. You can see it describes the what version of OpenAPI we're using, then what version of the API definition or the API it is, some descriptions, etc. On the left, you've got this little jump to, which makes it easier. This one is very simple. There's a single endpoint for now, which is /customer. It's got two methods, one get, and I can jump to it if I click there. I can see it's to retrieve the details. I can jump to the post. I can see it's to add a new customer. But if I look at servers, I can see there's like already a URL defined. So that's using a mock server that I've previously created, but we'll get you to create your own afterwards, so you can replace that with your own and you can see how that works. Last thing I want you to see is the schemas there. So these are like reusable components. For example, a customer, you'll use that when you create a customer, when you retrieve a customer, when you list customers. So putting it in components allows you to just have these repeatable components that you can place in different places in your API. At the bottom there, you've got this syntax thing. So there's different ways to break Postman. One of them is to remove the OpenAPI version. If I do this, nothing works anymore, can't validate the definition, so don't do that. Always have a version of your API, of your OpenAPI that's there. But then when Postman knows what version of OpenAPI it's using, you can try breaking the version of the API, for example. And here, Postman knows what an OpenAPI definition should look like. So it's going to tell you, oh, nope, it's missing a required property version. You can jump to it, and you can add it back. So we have like on-the-fly validation of your API definition. So if you're doing OpenAPI 2, OpenAPI 3, RAML, whatever type of API definition that you may be doing, so we have this on-the-fly validation. So that's on the OpenAPI. And then this is still a bit, you know how I mentioned that some people can read that and understand it. We actually generate some documentation for you just based on the OpenAPI as well. So you can see that this is not live. This literally just tells you what we expect from like the different paths. So if I like go there, okay, it's a get. That would be the URL. This is what it expects for query parameters, etc. But now let's look at the generation that it's created. So if I go in here, I have this generation that's based on the OpenAPI definition, and that's already something that I can send to people. So if you're familiar with Postman, a collection is made of requests, and this is already a live request. I can send this, get a response. So that's based on my mock server, which is generated from the same API definition. Actually, if I'm going to quickly jump back to here. If we look at the schemas, I can see my customer, for example, is made of these properties, and these properties are using these random variables, so random full name, random noun, random job title, and that's what creates these. So a random name, random company, and every time I'm going to send, it's just going to be a different one, because these are like random variables. So when you're integrating with things, you might want to generate like a list of different names, not always like James Smith or something like that. So that's one way to do it. And the way we have validation of OpenAPI definition now, we're going to try and break the validation of requests. So you have an end user that's sending these requests. Let's say they're trying to add a new customer, but they're missing the ID. So I'm going to go ahead, remove the ID. So for those of you following along, if you open the add new customer requests, and then you go to the body tab there, you can try removing one of the, it doesn't have to be ID, it can be name, etc. And now if you send this, you'll get a little prompt here that there's an issue. And because this collection is linked to my API definition, tells me, oh, you're actually missing a property that is ID. And that's also part of the contract that helps you. You're not knowing what you're querying. We're actually communicating with you that something is missing and you're not doing it right. So Postman is telling you, based on the API definition, we're doing like schema validation, you should have a property that's ID. So I'm gonna close that and add the ID back. And now if I send this, no issue, it works, I've added a new customer, everyone's happy. So far so good? Yep. So imported API definition, looked at it, automatically generated a documentation. And now I'm gonna jump back to the instructions just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. So we've checked the customer specification, we've checked the documentation. So what we're going to do is also, if we look at the documentation here, we have actually a bit more things. If we click the view complete collection documentation, this is something that's available for your consumers as well, if they want to play with the API. So you can publish that directly, and they can see, if I scroll down, because that's just my text, you can see the endpoint. You can get code examples. So for example, I could ask for, maybe someone here is working with Go. Then you go and say, working with Go. So here's my code example. Maybe someone here is working with, I don't know, Java, for example. So you can do OK HTTP. And so we've got this code generation that's ready for you to go. And I guess the easiest one would be curl. So you can go get curl, put it in your terminal somewhere and start like querying that API as well. Which is all, again, automated. All right. Let's move on to the next part. We've checked all the things that were automatically generated just from an API definition. For those of you who are on GitHub, click on this link at the bottom about the instructions. So the last one is open the instructions on GitHub. And that's the ones you would find here as well. But just for the sake of simplicity, I think it's easier to have them in separate tabs. So I'm going to have it here. So we've done the validation, we've looked at the docs, and I've mentioned how you can have different versions of an API. So maybe you're happy with this one, have a simple API, it retrieves customer and it adds new customer. This one is ready to go, so I'm going to go ahead and publish it. I'm going to publish a first version for my colleagues to be able to find. So I'll go back to the home page of my API here. So that's where it describes all of the things. And I'll hit Publish API. So I can say it's the 0.1 or 1.0. I can say first version with get and post. I can say what I want to publish, so what is going to be available to other people using the tool. And if I was on the paid plan, I could actually publish that to the internal private API network. So that's something that's available for paid users, which means you would be able to discover APIs created by your colleagues within Postman if you're collaborating in it. So I'm not on the paid account, so I'm going to publish the API. And I can see I have a 1.0 that's ready to go. I can go back, I need this one, and this one is available. But we're going to work on improving this one now. So while we're in the home page, a couple of things here. This API, we call it the API builder. So that's this side of Postman that is like under API. There's tons of stuff there. And this is what we believe, at least, should be the homepage of your API and your source of truth. So from there, you can integrate with many different tools. So let's say you want to create test and automation. You could go in here. You can run test, and then you can integrate with GitLab, GitHub Actions, Bitbucket, Jenkins, Travis CI. So you have that running in your CI/CD. You can see the history of runs. You can jump back if there's anything that was not working. You can do API performance. So if any of you are working with like Datadog or New Relic, you can push your data from Postman to them, but you can also get their data back in Postman, and you can see these dashboards directly here. And the last one, for those of you who were here in the previous session, you may have seen a bit of that. We integrate with API Gateway, and I'm only going to mention Azure because I know there's someone from Microsoft here. There's other ones, but there's also Azure. So we do have like integration with API gateways as well, right there. Cool. You could add a bit of like description. So this is a customer API. This is here would be like a long form, and I could drag and drop images, etc. I had a funny image, but it's on my laptop, so I can't even do it on this one. But yeah, so you can add documentation. And the last one is a big integration that might be valuable is with Git. I've said we believe this should be your source of truth, but we also know that a lot of customers or a lot of enterprise already have a source of truth, which oftentimes is Git, whether it's GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Azure repos, I think it's called, yeah, Azure DevOps repos. So you can integrate with this. So what this creates, it's going to push your API definition, collections attached to it, environment attached to it directly to Git, and then your developers can find them there and work from there. So that's another way to do it, and that's available on paid plans. So, you know, can't do it here, but it's there. Cool, so we've looked at the docs. We've published the V1 of our API. Now let's look at adding a new endpoint. I'm not expecting anyone to write JSON right now, so you can just copy-paste this if you're following along. I'm going to go back to my definition right there under my API definition index.json. And right after my customer one, line 14, so I'm going to wrap it down. And now line 76, just make sure you add a comma. It's the one thing you don't want to miss, because otherwise your JSON is not going to be valid. So add a comma, new line, and then paste whatever was in GitHub. And that should validate, hopefully. So line 76, I start, add a comma, then new line, then you can paste the JSON of this new endpoint. So that new endpoint, you can look at it. It's another get, but this one retrieves details for all of the customers at once. The operation ID is list customers, and then you can see there's an example response, which is details of all customers, and it's going to be an array of a list of customers. So we've made a reference to that customer list that we need to add as well. So I'm going to copy the customer list component right there. So it's a customer list, it's a type array, and it's made of several customers. So go back here, go to my components, and then right after my customer component, so I'll wrap it again, line 133, paste whatever you had from GitHub and add a comma to keep it valid JSON. Bit of copy pasting there, so if you're getting lost, let me know. Or if it doesn't validate, just make sure it's probably a comma issue, or it was pasted within some other object, etc. It doesn't look great, so I'm going to click on this button at the top right to beautify my API definition. Now it's all like using the right tabs or spaces based on what team you are, and I can save. And now I can see from the left, I now have another path, which gets a list of customers. I can see from my definition overview here, I have another path as well, but I don't have it in my collection, so I need to generate a new one. So for that, everyone good? Yep, cool. So I'll go back to my homepage for my API. And you can see here, there's the collection entry. I can click the plus and say generate from definition. And I think that's the most magic thing in all of Postman. It's just, I don't have to do any manual work. Just click that and it's going to generate collections for me based on my API definition. So I'll name it customer mock. So we're going to create a mock server. And you've got a few options. So I could change the way the requests are created, following the path or following the tags, which is something you can use in API definitions. I can change what is used for like the request generation or response parameter generation. Feel free to look around, but all of the default ones should be fine. So I'm going to leave it to default and generate the collection. So now it's being generated. I have it here. And to create a mock, there's a little trick that you need to do. It's copy to the workspace. So I'll click the 3 dots there, and I'll say copy to workspace at the bottom of the collection options. So now I have it here. It's in my collections, and I'll give you a few minutes, and I'm just gonna grab a drink. No questions so far? Does it all make sense, or are you just lost? Lost, completely lost. Okay, where did you lose us? Yeah. Okay, so did you try creating it from that side here on the left? Yes. Okay, so go back to the API where we've generated the collection, customer mock. Click on the 3 dots next to it. Yeah, 3 dots next to the customer mock collection that we've just generated. Pooja, can you? Yeah. Okay, got the. So you make sure that you've generated a new collection for it with the new endpoint. Okay, everyone else? Good? Yep, okay. So you've copied that collection over to your collections. So you should be seen here. Just making sure we're not. So from there, it's the same collection. You can see there's now like so there's still this customer folder with the 2 previous ones, but there's also this new request that gets a list of customers. So if I send that, I see an entire list of customers. But if you do right, again, the 3 dots here, you've got the option to mock the collection. So you can click on this. No? No? No, go ahead. Okay, yes, question. It's a copy. They're not linked. It won't. So that's something we're working on. Very good question. Something went wrong. Don't like to see this. I'll try again. Let me see if it created it. No, okay. So I'll go again. My collection, mock collection. Okay, cool. So give your mock a name. So I'll just call it customer. And then we'll tick that box when you create it to save the mock server URL as an environment variable. That's going to create an environment. The only reason I do that is so I can show you what's an environment in Postman and what's the value of it. So just make sure you tick that box and create the mock server. So now I have this URL that is publicly accessible. And I can actually go, let's see, let's do this one. If I were to hit it from anywhere else, just like a browser, I can do my mock server / customers and have this like live server that's customers. Okay, and then so that's the thing that I give my front-end team. They have some example responses. They can start creating maybe a user profile based on that, or like whatever they need to build based on that API. So it created an environment. If you click on the left here, there's this environment section, and you have this customer, because apparently I can't type, thing with a variable called URL. What we're going to do, we're going to rename that variable base URL with a capital U and save the change. So I went to environments, changed the name of my URL, and then I have it here. Let me close all of my tabs because it's starting to pile up. Okay. Recap from generating the mock server. Okay. Yeah. So to recap the whole like mock server creation, I went here, created a new collection from the definition, said that I called it customer mock, so that added it here. Then I said copy to workspace, so I would have a copy in the collections tab. And then from collections, I've said mock the collection, and I've created a mock server. So now that I'm in this collection, I can actually look, and we have this variable that is still calling the mock server that I've created. Now let's make it call the one you've created, and that's where the beauty of environments comes in. Let's say you have a staging environment, production environment, dev environment, and they all have a different base URL, maybe a different API key, maybe a different username for logging in, etc. You can have them saved in different environments, and then you can switch from one to the other from this drop down here at the top right. So currently this base URL is calling mine. Let's call it the prod environment. And you've all created your own mock server, which is going to be your dev environment. So if you switch here and get yours, which is probably called customer, you'll see that this now goes to yours. And you can call it, it should work the same way. Now you may not believe me. You may be like, how do I know that it's mine? Well, let's change the response on your side, and we should all have a different response from there. So what we can do, let's keep this one, the retrieve details for a particular customer. And you can use the drop down there on the left of the request, which opens the examples. And that's what the mock server actually uses to like send the response. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to edit this random full name, and that just replace with my name. So obviously make it yours, so we all have a different thing. So I've updated it. It's now using my full name, my personal full name. And if I go back to my request, make sure you save it, otherwise the mock server is not going to know. So I go back to my request and I call it. And because it's using my thing now, the name is using Arlemi Turpault, which is my name. And this is not being randomly generated anymore. I can keep on calling it. This one is always going to be the same. So that's one way for you to know that you're actually calling your own mock server. So you have this live server that everyone can use. If you wanted to protect it, you can actually put it behind an API key, because maybe you don't want people to hit your mock server and see how it works. But yeah, there you go. I'm going to go back to the instructions just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So we've created a mock collection, copied it to workspace, put it in an environment, and then we've authored example. So we've edited the example for the get request, put it with your name, and then that was it. So now we'll look at tests. You may or may not know that Postman started as just an API client for testing APIs. It was not much more. Everything that I'm showing you now is like 2 years old or less. But test is still like at the heart of like Postman. Most of you probably know Postman because you've been testing APIs, just calling an endpoint, seeing what comes back. So what we're going to jump into now, we'll see how you can make tests easier, but also how you can automate them, so make them run on a schedule, so you don't have to always come back and hit send and see what's coming back. So let's generate another collection from our API. So we'll go back here. We'll do customers. So that's going to be the same flow. We go back to the home page of the API. So API tab, customers, generate from definition. And then we'll call it customer tests. Should work. And generate it. So it's being generated. And then the same way, make sure you take the customer's test one here and copy to workspace. Okay. So if all is good, you now have in your collections tab 2 collections. One is customer mock. This one is the one we're using for testing, for mocking. And then we have customer tests, and that's the one we're going to use for our tests. So I've been chatting to a lot of you and a lot of people that have been attending the conference already. Whenever someone tells me they're using Postman to test, what they do is they click send, and then you look just manually, oh, there's a 200, okay, here. There's what I'm expecting here, which is manual testing, and it's still part of testing. So what we're going to do, we're going to add tests, actual tests. So there's a tests tab here. So let's open the retrieve details for a particular customer request, and then we'll go in the tests tab. And on the right-hand side, let me zoom in a bit, just because now we're going to go into like the smallest part of Postman, which is the code snippets. On the right-hand side of your tests tab here, scroll down, and you should find one that is status code is 200. So if I click on that, adds it automatically in here. And now the difference is, if I click send, I have under this test results tab something that tells me you passed your test, right? I don't have to come and check. To be fair, I'm just checking at a different place. So for this one, it doesn't make too much sense. But when we're going to run like several requests at once and we can have just a summary of all of them, it's going to be easier. So that's one thing. We're just testing the response code. So we're going to do the same for the other get. So let's go to the get retrieve details for all customers. Go to the code snippets, choose the status code is 200, save. And then for the add new customer, some of you may know that for a post request, when it's a successful creation, the status code is 201. So we're going to do the same thing, but we're actually going to change the code a bit. So we'll get the status code is 200, but we'll replace the to have status 200 to have status 201. I'm going to change it here in the title as well. Okay, I can test it. This should be good. My test is passing, and I have 201 created. So that's one test we can do. It's a very basic one, just testing the status code. There's more advanced stuff we can do. So one of the things we can test is that the response actually abides to a schema. We've been talking about schemas in the past, right? Like, I know my customer is made of a customer ID, a full name, which is a string. I know maybe there's like a Boolean somewhere. So I can actually write an entire schema and check that the response is valid against that schema. I'm not going to make you write the schema. So if you go back to the instructions, we've got this right there. So you can copy it. And we'll put this one in the get request for a specific customer. So if we go to retrieve details for a particular customer, just add a new line, paste in what we just had. And if we look at it, so we define a schema with a properties ID, which is type integer, property company, type string, and property name, type string. And then we actually test that the response has that schema. So now if I send this, it passes. The schema is valid. Try breaking it. So we can change, for example, I'm going to change the company to be a Boolean. And I'll send it again. And now my test is failing. So now the test starts to make a lot more sense, right? If you have a very long list of customers, you can loop through all of them and just make sure that they're valid against that schema. And it's not you manually going into here, just looking at all of them, looking that they have the right properties. So we'll keep that test failing just for the sake of the demo later on. And we'll do one other thing. We'll go back to the customer test collection. So if you click on the name, make sure you you save all of your things. I'm going to save this one. I'm going to go back to the collection, and there's a test tab here as well. And the benefit of this one is that any test that you write here is going to be run against all of the requests that are under. So I don't have to write the same test for each of these requests. And what I'm going to do here, if you look at the snippets, there's one that is response time is less than 200 milliseconds. So I'm going to click on this one, and that's a test that's going to run for each of the endpoints. That's what I'm interested in. Ideally, I want my API to be fast, and it should be less than 200 milliseconds. I can take a bet that that's not going to work because the Wi-Fi here is not ideal, but that's how it works. So we've got tests. We're testing. Say hi to the camera. We're testing the status code. We're testing the schema, and we're testing the response time. Okay. Now let's run this test. So click on the collection name. Again, let me know if anyone's falling behind. But click on the collection name. And then at the top right, you have this run button. If you don't see it, it's probably because you've got the documentation that's open. So you have to go to the 3 dots here, or you'll have to click that little icon. But find this run button. And here you can run the entire collection. So now it's not you going to each request, clicking send. You're starting to automate things. So I'm going to click run customer tests. Now it's going to run each of the endpoint one by one. And I can see the results. So tons of fail. As expected, out of the 200 milliseconds failed. I also have my schema is valid that failed. So I have filters, right? I can see the one that passed, the one that failed. I can dive into it. I can actually look, oh, why did this one fail? Let's look at what was the request URL, what was the response headers, etc. So a bit of like digging into what worked or what did not work. It's still manual though, right? I had to click run. So now let's look how we can completely automate that. And that's the last part. So for those of you who are following along on the instructions, the last part, the schedule runs, is where we're at. So we'll go back to the collection. We'll find the run button. So I'll click the run. And here you'll see two options on the right-hand side. One of them is schedule runs. The other one is automate runs via CLI. I won't make you create the CLI calls, but just so you know, from there you can actually get the code for Jenkins, Circle CI, Travis CI, GitHub, etc., etc. What we'll look at is the schedule runs. So I'm going to give my schedule a name. So it's going to be customer schedule, because why not? And here you get to pick when you want it to run. So this is kind of like I had someone coming to the booth earlier, and I think it was the right way. It's a health check. You know, every day at 4 p.m., or actually maybe every day in the morning, right? At 7 a.m., I'm going to run these tests. If they fail, I can say, oh, send Pooja an email, right? So it's going to send, sorry, Pooja, you're going to get a lot of stuff in your email. But I can define this. I could attach an environment. So you could say, I'm going to use my customer environment because you want to hit it with your mock server, not mine. And then once this is done, schedule the run. And then this is going to create this customer schedule. I'm actually going to run it manually because we're not going to wait until tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. to prove you that it works. But this is what it does. It runs it. I'm going to run it another time just so you kind of see how it works. But yeah, you can see all of the previous runs. You can dive into one, for example, see the test that failed that didn't fail. Look at the logs to see what didn't work. Was there a question? Yeah.
So is these logs or like the latest one possible to be shown on the documentation only?
So we don't show it in the documentation, but if you go back to the APIs, remember how I was talking about the test and automation here. So from here, you can also run them. So for example, my customer tests. So this is not actually the correct collection. I need to grab the ones from my workspace, which has the same name, which is a bit annoying. But now if I go back to here, from there, I can run it. And then I'll actually see that I have my last run results there. So that's where it becomes your center of information for your API. The same way, if you have I mentioned the Postman CLI, if you're running stuff in your CI/CD, the results are pushed back to Postman. So they would appear on this second part here on the automation. Make sense? Yep. Cool. So yeah, let's just quickly go back to how it looks. You can look at my runs. Yeah, question? Postman Cloud, which is AWS US East. Yeah. If you use the Postman CLI, then it's executed on your own environment, like wherever they run. But the schedule runs are on Postman Cloud. So I can see this fails, and I can again see, etc. Cool. Okay. We looked at a lot of things, and I think I'm just running out of time. So I'm going to go back to the slides and share it again. Oh, not share it this way. Share it this way. Okay. That was the instructions, and that's quick kind of recap of what we've done. I've been talking so much. I always do that. I talk a lot. If you have any questions, I'll get them. But quickly, what we've done, you imported a spec. That was the first thing. I didn't want to make a workshop where we write the spec, because that would be the entire time. So I really wanted to jump into the benefits of having that spec and what the things you can generate from it. So we looked at the way you could generate docs, which literally all you had to do was just look at it. It was already there. Generating test suites and adding tests, running them on a schedule. Generating a mock server, so that enables different things, including like parallel development between front end and back end. Validation, and there's different types of validation. One of them is validating that your API definition is valid. The other one is validating that your requests are valid against the API definition. And then the monitoring, scheduling of tests. I think that's all I have. I'll keep that on the screen, and I'm going to take some questions. And then I'm going to ask you questions. But who has a question for me? Haha. So I use Bright because I think there's a better contrast when you're like projecting the screen. But if you're in Postman, if you do on Windows, it's Control, comma, and on Mac, it's Command, comma. No, that's not, because it's the browser. So you can open the settings here at the top, change the theme to dark mode, and then could have done that, to be fair. But no, you have both. I've been pestering the team to get like a customizable theme. So hopefully it's going to come one day, and you'll be able to select your own like colors, etc. But you know, if that's something you want, let them know as well, and then I can say, oh look, they want that too. We need this. Good question. If you have any feedback, if you go to Postman app support, so that's on GitHub. Hopefully, no. Okay, let's do this. No. How do you do a private navigation on here? Okay. Postman app support. So we take all of the feature requests on GitHub, so it's public. If you have a feature request, search there, add your comment, add your use case. If it's not there, create a new one. PMs look at that, developer advocacy looks at that, the CEO looks at that. So yeah, just make sure you put it in there. There first, yeah.
What you showed us the API creation part. Because with Compose, I was interested by the consumption of the API itself.
Yeah, so we've done a bit of the consumption. Whenever we were in that part, like that collection tab, that's where we actually query the API. So all of these calls are like querying the API. There's a lot more to it. I kind of flew over it because of time. But we do have, we have a lot of training on like API consumption or like API consumer side, which I'm happy to share. So if you just come around at the end, I'll scan you and I'll make sure that I send you the things. Yep. That was there, yep.
How do you actually connect the Postman API server backend? I think one way to do it is to enforce with the open API documentation. What are APIs that evolve in the backend?
So if you're actually API first and you're using the API definition, one of the way to connect them is to use Git, the things that I've mentioned. So Git will be the place where your code lives and where your API definition lives. We don't do, we do a bit of, so if you're in here, let me go to the right place. We do a bit of like code generation for like Go, Node, Java, and Python, but you can't update, so we'll always just generate a new boilerplate. So we don't update the boilerplate we've already created. So the main thing is just keeping them living at the same place so that your developers know where to look for things. Was there no? Yeah. Yeah, so we had a very simple mock server because, again, time. I mentioned this is using the examples here. I could add other examples. For example, I can save another response, and I can say this one is going to be, I'll change that to be 400, bad request, change that to be no, because no. and then I'll say maybe that's when they call a string here. That's just an example, right? But now I just add new examples like this, and so that's where the mapping happens. The mapping looks at how the request is parameterized, like the query parameters, the body parameters, the header parameters, all of this, and then it matches the closest one. I think at the back there was a question, yeah? So, for those of you who may have known the monitors feature, it looks very similar to scheduled features. The main difference is that there is none at the moment. The main reason is people didn't know about monitors, so we've just made it available through the collection flow. When you go into running collections, we just wanted it to be there. So scheduled runs is the new monitor, and monitor is going to evolve to become something that is closer to monitoring. So for now, it's very similar, but monitor is now going to evolve, and scheduled runs is here to stay. Yep. Yep. So now in Postman, in case you didn't know, if you click New, you have WebSocket and gRPC. So you can test either of these in Postman directly. For WebSocket, we also support socket.io. So you can open your request, like create a new request, say socket.io, and just put your stuff there. For gRPC, we do gRPC, I think it's called introspection or something, just reflection, server reflection. So yeah, like we do support them, and you can test both of these in Postman as well. Yeah, so for gRPC, we have mocking and we have test suites. For WebSockets, not yet. That's why WebSocket is still beta and gRPC is now like GA. Okay, let me ask you a couple questions, because I have a minute. And I have books to give away, because I'm not like going home with them. So I'm going to ask a question out loud. Please raise your hand, don't shout out the answer. Because I need to be able to say, oh, you were the first one to raise your hand or not. What were my questions? Can someone give me 3 items I can generate from an API definitions? Okay, at the back there. Louder, louder. Yeah. Yeah. And the components. So can you give me these components? What are these components? Oh, okay, you meant in the API definition. It's not exactly what I was expecting as an answer. So yeah, for example, like documentation is one. Is there anyone else who want to give a go at this question? 3 things I can generate? No one? Yeah, Mox is one. Collection? Tests? That's now it's a group answer. What am I supposed to do with this? Okay. Yeah, well, how many do I have? Yeah, I'll just ask a second question, and then, yeah, I'll remember. So I know you gave a piece of the answer, you gave a piece of the answer. And then who said documentation? Was documentation around there? Okay, okay. Can someone tell me 3 integrations we have? So like third-party integrations you may have. I want company names. Yeah, there. Yep. Yeah, I want 3. Git. Yeah, cool. No, that's fine. Datadog observability, that works. Okay, so there's one for you. Maybe I have time for one more question. Random question. How many users Postman has? Yeah, there. Millions. Good answer. I was taking more than 1 as well. So any of these worked, okay. I really need to get rid of these books.